My house was empty.
It's contagious.
She is old enough people.
Microphones are on, Kathy. Waiting on you. Mics are on.
On record.
Good evening. Welcome to the City of Lincoln City Council meeting for Monday, November 13th, 2017. I show 6:03 p.m. If you wish to speak on an agenda or non-agenda item, please sign up on the sheet near the entrance door to the council chambers. You'll be called to speak during the public comment section. Comments or testimony on agenda items listed under public hearing. Public comment will be taken at that time. Roll call, please.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Dick Anderson.
Yes.
Riley Hoagland. Deanna Hinton.
Yes, here.
Judy Casper is excused. Susan Walke.
Here.
And Kip Ward.
Here. Thank you. Would you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to
The flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Consent agenda. 2017-18 police vehicle purchase. Who's on that? You want to run that? Ron?
It's on the
I know.
consent.
Okay.
Or if you'd like to take it off the consent, we
Is there anything
can.
you want to say? No, I'm good. No, please. Yeah.
I would like to
Like to what?
remove it from consent.
Okay. It's the only consent agenda, so go ahead.
So, okay. I just have a question of all of us. There is I just wanted to ask the question before we had this vote, that one of the vehicles which is on the list to be auctioned off, we have an opportunity perhaps for donating that if there was a worthy cause and a nonprofit. The cities can do that. And so I just wanted to ask the question if we wanted to see if that would be an option we would like to consider.
Which vehicle are you speaking?
There's one that is, there's two vehicles, one that the chief is going to keep and use in another way, and then another vehicle which is going to be auctioned. So it would be the one to be auctioned.
Mayor?
Yes.
I guess the question I would have, what typically happens with the funds received from the auction of your surplus vehicles?
Those are returned to general fund dollars.
Your Honor, the city code provides that the city council may dispose of surplus property by donation. It's actually not clear whether or not the city manager has any delegated authority for donations. It's one of the things we'd like to bring back to you. But in this case, the local contract review board, the city council gets to make the decision if you want to make a donation. The finding you must make when you make a donation is that the disposal will promote the economic development or the public welfare of the city. So I'm not asking you to make that finding tonight, but if you want staff to look into whether or not there's not-for-profit groups that, or other governmental entities that may be interested in this vehicle, then we'd have to come back and make that finding if you do that. So otherwise, I think the chief was just asking for a surplus property declaration either now or later with others, and then sale to the highest bidder through auction.
And then I guess I'd have a question, Councilor Hinton, do you have a group in mind? Has a group raised their hand to say we could use this?
No, I don't, but because we have such a large effort of nonprofits, and especially now during the, the homeless season, needing to find a place, and I'm sure that there's a lot of transportation issues, I just thought we should ask ourselves the question, whether or not, I don't have anyone in mind, no.
That's a good question. I don't have the answer.
My reaction, Mr. Mayor, my reaction is, since the funds go back into general fund, that's where we get our outside agency dollars, and we've already gone beyond our normal 50,000 and up to 150 this year. So again, for smooth sailing and ease, and no haranguing back at us for vehicles that don't work, I'd say let's move the process to the normal disposal of surplus property.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, but I'm also inclined to agree with you in that I think it's something worth looking into at some point, because I can understand the cost of acquiring a vehicle versus what we're going to write off could be of great benefit to somebody, as long as we have, of course, the, no liability and as is in the whole gig. But I'd like to talk about that some more sometime.
Yeah, and it's not just, this came up, I've had this thought before, but this came up because it's on the agenda today, and it's an automobile. And, but other things could be like a desk or chairs or other type of things that the city finds as surplus could also be donated. So I just want to bring up the bigger, broader question to all of us, if that's something we want to look at and consider in the future.
Thank you.
Your Honor, just to be clear, I am working on,
Get your mic up.
I am working on an ordinance to return to you. It was actually ordinance 21, which increases the delegation to the city manager. We've talked about this issue where it's not clear that he has the authority to make donations. So we'll up the dollar amount and maybe create a little bit more process for him to go through and, solicit interested organizations for donations. So I'll try to flesh that out for the next time.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else? All right.
Do we have a schedule of replacing police vehicles?
Yes, it's generally every 5 years we replace 2 vehicles. Last year, we didn't replace any of the patrol vehicles because the mileage wasn't as high as I'd like to see to justify replacing it. So last year, we replaced one of the detective vehicles and acquired a administrative vehicle for Lieutenant Palmer. So we didn't do any patrol vehicles last year.
But we do replace some sort of vehicle most every year?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, please.
Didn't you buy a truck?
That would be the detective vehicle that I just alluded to.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to approve the purchase of the 2 2018 Ford Interceptors and declare the other 2 surplus.
Second.
Oh, so I guess the question is it just one of the cars surplus?
Yes, I'd
No.
like to retain the other one for project.
So I'd amend my parts. I'd amend my motion to one car of the as surplus.
Second the amendment.
Second? Okay, okay, hear you. Motion to second. Any further discussion?
A little bit, kind of. It'll take 10 seconds. Have you guys
Go into
thought,
Near the mic.
sorry, have you guys thought about checking into the EVs? I'm sorry, electrical vehicles?
Anyone
I
else?
would suggest that.
Further discussion?
They go very fast.
I do. I have one more. You have the purchase amount, and then you have the 19.2 for the outfitting and equipment things. Is that's done not in-house? Is there an additional amount of work to be done by the city for those vehicles as well? I recall somewhere that it does we also do stuff, but we also pay someone to add things to it. Is that correct?
No, the city used to build the cars. They don't anymore. I contract that out.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I guess since we're spending, we need a roll call.
Hinton,
Yes.
Walke,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Williams.
Yes.
Anderson.
Yes.
And Hoagland.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I have no idea what council deliberation means. Comments from citizens present on agenda and non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the audience to bring to the council's attention any item not listed on the agenda for public hearing or public comment. Comments are limited to 5 minutes per citizen, and the city recorder will use the light system. Speakers may not yield their times to others, and as a general rule, this is not a time for exchange of questions. At the conclusion of this agenda item, a councilor may discuss or raise questions regarding an item presented by a citizen. The mayor has the authority to reduce the time allowed for comment in accordance with the number of persons present and signed up to speak. I don't have a sheet. Anyone on there? Nobody. It's your chance. Going, gone. All right, we're moving on. Presentations. Update, city property development, workforce housing.
Well, they are coming back up. I'll just mention again, this is a continuation of our discussion that we had in the urban renewal meeting. However, this time we are dealing with city properties, and they are both commercial and residential.
Okay, some of this will be a little repetitive, so you'll have to pardon it, but since we've changed hats from urban renewal to city council, just want to introduce John Southgate. He's our development consultant. He is assisting as we move forward with development of the 4 urban renewal properties and what we are proposing to move forward with 4 city-owned properties, as Mr. Chandler mentioned, 2 of which are housing and actually 3 are housing and 1 is commercial. Mr. Southgate comes from a very broad background with development and revitalization. Used to work for Portland Development Commission and then was the Economic Development Director for City of Hillsborough and now consults and has worked with many cities and county governments in reviewing development codes and helping to find the right developers for projects and probably other things that only he knows.
I sing a mean bass baritone, too.
So at this point, what we'd like to do is just, again, review the properties that we are talking about moving forward in January with a development offering. And then John will go over kind of what we can expect with the development process and our timeline. So again, reviewing the 4 urban renewal properties, we have one at Northwest 15th Street, which is a 100 by 100 lot. Here's what it looked like a few years ago. It doesn't look much different other than the landscaping's grown in a bit more. D-Lake, the Northeast 1st Street property, which is otherwise known as Hostetler Park. In Nelscott, we have a property at Southeast 32nd Street, right on Highway 101. And in Taft, Southwest 51st Street at the end of the street. And city properties, we have 2 parcels in Ocean Lake at Northeast 25th Street. And the idea is to include this in the development offering for workforce housing. And it's just under 4 acres. The other properties in Ocean Lake at 2310 Northeast Reef Avenue, similar idea with trying to get some workforce or, as Mr. Southgate mentioned, missing middle housing on the ground. And this is the Fernwood Loop property, which is part of Villages. And again, this property, we would like to have it included in the development offering. Again, it's going to be dependent on timing. We've been working very closely with the planning department for obvious reasons, in particular with this property because of the revision of the master plan, but also because developers are going to be working with us and also closely with planning on their projects. And lastly, the TND building, or the Taft Nell Scott D-Lake Fire Building, which is on Southwest 4th Street. This is the commercial building that we would like to include as well. This could just be a property sale, or it could be an opportunity for business incubator, or just a straight-up lease. It really just depends on what offerings would come in. And that's what that building looks like now. Are there any questions on the properties? No?
Please.
I'm sorry I didn't ask this in our previous meeting. When the Hostetler Park property was donated to the city, I'm wondering if there were any restrictions on that gift, on how that property was to be used. Has that been researched?
Yeah, we've looked at that. From what I can tell, there aren't any. There are some easements and wetland considerations, but we do have the title report, and ODOT has an easement as well that we have kind of a question about where it begins and ends. So with all of these properties, we do have a bit more homework to do so that when we issue the request for interest, we can be as clear as we can to help make it a shorter timeline for developers.
But it wasn't donated as a park?
No.
Okay.
From what I understand, it was purchased by Urban Renewal when there was a motel considered for development. And so, not that
I
I'm
didn't
aware of.
realize it was purchased by Urban Renewal. I'd forgotten that. Okay.
Yeah, it was, so there's open space money just to the east where all of the scrub brush is. It's a lot of great birding habitat. And then just the Urban Renewal parcel is the one that abuts Highway 101.
Okay.
So, okay.
Mr. Chair? Oh.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Southgate, this last property, is hard to see the architectural beauty in that building. But I'm wondering if there's, as you talk to potential developers, buyers, is there value in knowing whether that building should be gone before the developer even takes it into consideration, or?
Yes, this is one we've just been talking about in the last week or two, so we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about its incorporation. However, you just added something to the to-do list. I think it probably would behoove bringing an architect or some building condition expert to go in and as your funds allow, to do at least a basic evaluation of code compliances of exiting. I'm assuming from the eyeballing, it may be unreinforced masonry. I would never recommend tearing down a building. If it's in such horrible condition, it has to come down. But again, my example from Hillsborough, someone may see something that we don't see there. But I think it's worth doing at least a quick study of the building condition.
So, go ahead. I guess following up on that, and I hate to steal Councilor Ward's previous concerns, but again, I'm assuming at the time of selection, again, a developer would talk to us about the potential of this building or property, and I guess the last thing we've talked about wanting is an eyesore to remain on the site. Sometimes eyesores stay forever, and so that, again, I'm assuming, depending on what the developer had in mind, that'd be part of our selection process. So,
very much so. I think that, it's hard to, I'll take a look at that building tomorrow. I literally have not seen this building yet, but you never know if someone said, okay, I want to put up some roll-up doors, and have some outdoor seating. That assumes that the building is in such a condition that it lends itself to that. But I would never be hasty to tear something down, because once it's gone, it's gone. And in fact, back to the Rockwood Fred Meyer, the city made the decision, I think, kind of hastily years ago, because they tore it down, and it's now been at least 10 years. That's not a good signal for Rockwood. In retrospect, maybe they should have kept it and put even mundane uses there, slap a coat of paint on it. But so I would counsel not to hastily tear it down. If a building condition report comes back, this is a clear and present danger, then probably need to take it down. But again, as you said, you control what goes in there and what it looks like when you make that selection. By the way, there'll also be a schedule of performance. So Mr. Developer selected because he has a cool idea for that building, and when you enter into your formal agreement with him to sell it for X, but that agreement will include terms that it will be for these specific uses, and you will begin construction by this date. You know, in fact, you probably, before you formally convey the property, you'll want to see evidence that they have the financing lined up. Beaverton with the round, you know the round, they had conveyed the property to the developer before they had their permanent financing lined up, so it sat there empty. So you want to avoid that embarrassment for everybody's sake.
Mr. Ward? Thank you. Councilor Anderson brought up a point regarding the parking or the lot 100 by 100, I think on 15th Street. And, you know, I don't know if you've walked that street or not, but it's a really nice street that promises something nice at the end of it. Unfortunately, it doesn't deliver. But that's the one place that we have is that, I don't know if you've been to Nye Beach in Newport, that really fits itself nicely to the, and that parking lot, if that area ever is to be developed, would be essential to any development that they would have for as far as parking goes. And the advantage of putting property like that right in front of hotels is because you've moved the business to its market. So all those hotels have 1,000 or so people that have access to little restaurants and that type of thing, which makes the area prosperous. It drives up room rates, but it also keeps cars off the highway. So going back to what Councilor Anderson said, do you have any plans? Are you even thinking in that direction? I mean, we've got a grand entryway, and then you actually have access that goes down to the beach and a ton of hotels, but all the property in back of them are basically one unit, you know, some of them are VRDs. So that's my question.
When you say in back of them, you kind of lost me on the...
Oh, you got the ocean front where the hotels are, coming towards inland.
Okay.
You've got a strip there that are basically residences, but would it make the highest and best use would likely be restaurants and gift shops and that type of thing to create an area like Nye Beach. And if you're not careful with that 100 by 100 lot, that might be really valuable one day for parking if we do ever decide to develop an area like that. It's a dream, but, you know, it's not an unrealistic dream.
Yeah, that's a great point. With most of the properties, there's some level of idea about what the intention was behind purchasing the property. For this property, the idea was to try to increase the commercial activity on that street because it is mostly residential or hotel. You know, we had a wonderful consultant do a feasibility study on what could be done on that property to really talk about how do we, as you just mentioned, how do we access the commercial activity of the guests with the Highway 101 commercial activity, business community. And this is really a key connection, having the drive down to the beach. This would be our only opportunity on that property to help try to tilt the scales more in a commercial direction. So while I know that there's a lot of demand in that area, and we have talked about parking, and it is ultimately your decision, parking wasn't really the reason why the property was purchased. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know you've all heard this a few minutes ago, but if John, if you could bear with us so that John can go through the process of development briefly, that would be great, just so that our viewers and audience can understand kind of what we're envisioning for the next steps.
Try to do maybe a little bit higher level summary. So again, we're proposed to include these 4 properties along with the 4 urban rural area properties in a single development offering. Again, the thought that there's more bang for the buck. So attracting developer interest by having 8 properties, I think that is more likely to engender interest than doing 1 or 2 of these individually. That doesn't preclude specifying what we want for this versus that property. So for instance, the 2 housing sites, workforce housing sites, whereas on some of these sites we might say we're open to all ideas that are responsive to our broad guiding principles. But for these sites, first of all, the zoning only allows residential, it doesn't allow commercial or mixed use. But also we could be more specific and say on these sites we're looking for workforce housing as the predominant, if not the exclusive use. So we could specify. The idea, again, is to continue talking to developers or people who touch developers, architects, planners, whatever. We still have some interviews, again, as early as tomorrow morning. We have our next developer interview with an interested party who knows Lincoln City well, grew up, family had property here, so he's not just, a carpetbag from outside. He knows Lincoln City pretty well. Meanwhile, we will be drafting the actual development offering for your consideration in January. Again, to repeat myself a little bit, it'll be high-level principles is really the most important element of this offering. It's you're conveying to developers what you want to see, and then asking them, to your question earlier, what's your experience, what are your credentials, what have you done, what are your ideas for some or all of these sites, and why are you the right one for us to select to negotiate a deal with. That offering would go out in later January after you have another look at, after you have a look at it in earlier January, a deadline of roughly early March. We would vet the responses. You would make the decision as to which developer or developers to select. It's conceivable, although frankly doubtful, that you may find that developer X wants to develop projects on each one of these 8 properties, and so you select him or her because they have the best ideas for all of them. I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to probably end up with several different developers, different scale. I know there's at least one local developer team that Ms. Robertson introduced me to, strike me as very capable and creative and responsive to what you want. Some of the larger pieces will probably be from out of town, from Portland developers. You'll vet those sometime in March. In talent, it took one meeting and then we were ready to go. They made the selection. You may be prepared to make that selection. March, April, begin negotiations. Some of these may be simple enough that, to your earlier question, Councilor Anderson, may be able to begin construction. I hope some of these projects begin construction in the 2018 construction year. And I guess the only other thing I want to reiterate is, to your credit, you have serious developer interest from quality developers. I will not promise that each one of these properties will get multiple responses, but I think most, if not all of these, will get responses that you're pleased with and that you want to enter into negotiations with. During that negotiation period, you will pin down and you control the terms, the program, the design, etc. It's not like you select them and then good luck, now they're off and running and they do whatever they want. You will control it all the way through the end of the transaction. And after that, there'll be a development agreement that obligates them to do what they said back in March of 2018.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
So will the 2 of you be working together to put the initial information out to them? So you'll include the history, you'll include the zoning, and so they'll have, and photographs of the site and all of that. And then we'll see that, is what I'm hearing, before you send it out. And
yeah, there will be a lot of information in there. We'll try to encapsulate it so that it's, not an 8-week read. But yes, maps and zoning and all of the things that developers are really, at a higher level, that we're not going to get into the weeds too much because that's later after developer selection. But really at a high level, they can easily see if it's something they're interested in and then consider doing a response.
Okay, good.
But you just did a pretty good job of outlining what it'll have background. What is the zoning at a high level? What's the background? What are the utilities? I mean, things indeed the developer wants to know going in, what he or she's getting into. I will commend Mr. Townsend and his staff have been helping frame the zoning summary. A little bit more refinement on my part, but, the Lincoln City, it's a great staff. Ms. Robertson is impressed, and that's what Mr. Chandler has, and this really does matter. One of the points I want to make is when a developer considers responding to this, if it's a dysfunctional situation, that's going to give them pause. But the fact that you have, and I'll embarrass Ms. Robertson in particular, the developers that she's met with, they all get that she's passionate about doing good projects for Lincoln City and that she's going to work hard and bring her intelligence to bear on making something good happen here. And that really does matter.
Anyone else? No? Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, before we leave that, I guess I'd like to thank the presentation and all the information, and it just feels good that this council and urban renewal, both previous, that we're finally bringing our property assets to the table to, I think, play government's role of facilitating some change. We're fortunate enough to have this land and these developments in this process we're now going through. Hopefully can make some, add jobs back to the tax rolls and probably, I think Mr. Southgate talked about it, be a catalyst for more development in these areas. So,
Well said,
nice to
thank
see.
you. No, appreciate that. Yes, very much, and I'm sorry if I haven't been too engaging on this. It's stellar work. Thank you, and we're glad to have you on board.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me to help.
Right. Once again, there we go. With council's permission, we have our appointees way at the end of this meeting. Would anyone object to bringing them forward and letting them go home? For our vacancy, our committee vacancies?
Oh, that's a nice idea.
Does that work? Okay.
Yeah.
Not much to do today.
Well, let's just let them go home anyway.
They want to.
They're not spellbound and excited with the agenda?
But they can always stay if they want, and we'll find out if we made the right choices. So we're watching, if that's okay then? Yeah. Okay. Then we're going to change, we're going to move up to K, application for volunteer position, Driftwood Public Library, Carolyn Ganschau. Carolyn, I'm sorry. I only hear you say your first name that often. Who was in charge of that? Yes.
Both Councilor Casper and I separately interviewed Ms. Ganschau. She has been a library board member in the past, and she's a library foundation board member, and I think she would be an asset to return to the board. I heartily recommend her.
Anything else?
Ms. Walke, did Judy also recommend her? Okay. I don't know.
Kathy?
Yes.
Okay.
We both telephone interviewed her separately, so, yeah.
Your motion?
I move to appoint Carolyn Ganschau as to the library board.
Second.
Motion second, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Welcome aboard. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Appreciate your spirit of volunteerism. All right.
Congratulations, Carrie.
And then application for volunteer position, Parks Board, Donna Eddy. And that was you and I. You interviewed in person, I interviewed by phone, and I can highly recommend Ms. Eddy. and I believe you do too.
I agree
Yeah,
wholeheartedly.
she showed a great amount of enthusiasm and has visited our parks and our open spaces and is well acquainted with them, and I think would be a great advocate for them. So, a motion?
I move to appoint Donna Eddy to the Parks Board.
Second. Motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you very much, Donna. Welcome aboard. And you're free to go or free to stay. But we're watching you.
Mr. Mayor, I might remind the audience that there's still, a spot in the Driftwood Library Board, as well as Parks. There would be some more vacancies coming up. So if you're waited unknowingly to put your application in, now would be a good time.
That'll be a good time, so yeah, step up.
They're going fast.
And I know that they're all joking aside, they're very important positions, and they're actually fun positions. And I haven't met anyone yet who hasn't had a good time, maybe not a good time, but a rewarding time on each of these positions. So we highly encourage our residents to step up. All right, so now we're back on. Yes.
I believe that our agenda was revised, and I'm wondering if you wanted to add number 9. I don't believe that was on the agenda initially.
I'm sorry.
Number 9 was added after the agenda was prepared, and technically under the council rules, it needs your consent, the presiding officer's consent to add number 9 to the agenda.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, yeah. No problem. Okay, thank you for reminding me. Okay, so we are at H, public hearings, public comment, yes? Yeah, because I jumped around there. Resolution 2017-20, a resolution of the City of Lincoln City adopting revisions to the citywide fee schedule.
Mr. Mayor, we are proposing, these are some of the items we had actually discussed when the budget was adopted. We are proposing some changes to 4 areas. The first are the fees that are associated with the community center. We are proposing a 10% increase on the entrance fees and a 20% increase on the facility rentals. Now, essentially what that means, as far as for practicality purposes, it's that the general admission for youth 16 and under would go from $2.50 to $2.75. For adults, it would go from $6 to $6.50, and so forth. Under the facilities rentals, for example, for the deck rental, it would go from $13.26 per hour to $16 per hour. And those are in the schedule that is before you, and I won't go through all of those individually. The second item that is before you on a change is for our public works. It is a fee for an erosion control kit. This is actually a new fee that we're proposing. We're finding that in this area, the erosion control kit is the contractors use that to prevent the erosion on their construction areas. We have strongly recommend that they use they're called wattles. They're the straw bells, the 100-foot long straw or chip bells, instead of the black fabric. What we've found is that it's very difficult to get in this area, and so we've had a request from our contractors if we could provide those. So what we're looking at is $125.75 is our cost. The second part of this is the fire hydrant relocation fee. On occasion, we are asked to move our fire hydrants to a different location. We have been charging this fee, but as we reviewed it, we realized it was not part of the fee schedule, so this is to formalize it. It's $3,125. The library is proposing that we increase the fee for the headphones from $2 to $3, which is the replacement cost of the headphone. And then finally, We are proposing an $850 plus one-half of the cost of the appraisal for the land exchange process. This was born out of our discussions that we've had over the last year as we talked with two property owners about exchanging the properties. The $850 reflects the cost associated with the city in processing that.
Ron, if I could, a quick question. Taking back to the erosion control, you're saying that the hay bales are hard to get a hold of?
Can't get them in this area. They're having to travel to go get them.
So how do we get them in?
Well, what they've requested is that when we have somebody that's going over to the valley or to a different area, we'll pick them up, have 3 or 4 of them on hand, and then as they need them, we'll sell them to them. It's really a convenience. There's actually 2 parts to it. It's a convenience. It's also to make sure that they use the wattles instead of the black fabric.
And where
Because they'll
would
be
we
getting
store
from
those?
us. Pardon me?
Where would we store those?
Just over in the shop.
And there's room for that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's really a convenience to help.
No, I understand. I'm just trying to picture where we're getting hay bales and how long we keep them and what the lifespan is of a hay bale.
Hay bales?
Not hay bales.
They're not hay bales.
No, they're tubes that go about 100 feet
okay,
long.
Okay, I'm sorry. I totally lost what you were talking
No,
about.
they're made out of straw and chip.
Straw. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and they're about 100 feet long. You put them around the perimeter of the
All right.
construction site.
Okay, got it. All right, got it. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, please.
I have a couple questions, if I could. Mr. Chandler, on page 16, lines 34 to 38, and this is the fee for street cutting. And I'm just curious if you could explain what that is, because they have year 1 through 5 and different fees associated with it, but I'm not quite sure what that's all about.
Okay.
Under Public Works?
Yeah, it depends, as I understand this, it depends upon the age of the street. So if it's cut within the first year, we charge a $500 fee.
Oh, okay.
It goes down as the streets get older.
Okay, that makes a little more sense. And then I have another couple questions, if I may.
Please.
Okay. On page 19, under the land exchange, so there's an $850 fee for plus 1/2 of the cost of an appraisal. But for the land exchange for $850, I just had this question. What if we, the city, want the exchange? Then would we waive the fee? Or, I mean, I'm just kind of curious about that.
Well, if we initiate it, we still have to pay the fees that are associated with publications and everything
Okay.
else. You could pay yourself the $850 and then use it, or just pay the fees.
Okay,
This is really for someone that would be initiating it and not the city.
okay. I gotcha. And I have one final one. And this one isn't necessarily on there, but just looking at the fee schedule, it gave me some thought about on page 20, which is the VRD fee, $100 for the light, oops, I lost my notes, $100 for the, this is on page 20, for those of you who are following along. Let me get down there myself. And I guess I'm just asking the question. We certainly wouldn't want to have a discussion about it tonight, but I just wanted to throw out an idea either for an additional increase of that fee or an additional fee of something that we could add for, I don't even know how much, towards an affordable housing fund, but attached to the VRDs. That would go into the affordable housing budget. It'd be another revenue for that budget that, to me, would make sense. And like I said, that'd be a bigger discussion some other time, but I just wanted to throw it out there.
And I've got a question, if I might, Ron. Do you have the information on how much we're generating from the room rentals and, say, the deck rental, too? Because those numbers seem really low for what we're charging. And is it just not even worth talking about?
I don't have that, I don't have that in my notes. Well, let's see. I don't have the amount, but I do have the percentage. Room facility park reservation revenue covers 1.7% of the operating cost.
Yeah, I don't want to lump in the end of the 51st Street with that, because I know that's a highly desirable, highly used area versus those rooms. And to me, and I could be way off base, but $14.50 per hour seems a very low rate for a large meeting room.
I'll check and find out.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of room there. I'm not in favor of raising rates again on just the general public. I also had a question concerning the pool rental fee. We charge private schools, but we don't charge the school district.
No, we charge the schools themselves. That is correct.
Right. Is there a particular reason why private schools don't get the same? Do the parents not pay the same taxes?
I'll have to answer. I'll have to bring that back to you as well, Mayor. I'm not sure I know the answer.
And I would prefer to turn it around, is let's charge the school district too, or the school.
Right.
For that, because this free seems, and again, I was, one of the first guys yelling about, hey, why aren't we teaching our kids how to swim?
Right.
But fair is fair. And when I look at the pool rental, you look at a minimum 25 people, at $66.50, that turns it to $266 each. The regular fee is $275. We're losing 10 cents per person, and we give a group rental. So I'd like to see if we can find just a little extra money in there besides raising rates flat out on people. That's all I had. Someone else has something? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, does this, since it's under public hearings and public comment, is there a comment provision from the public, or?
There should be.
Are we the public?
Yeah, I'm confused by that myself, but I'd be more than willing to listen to anyone if they had something to say. I have nobody signed up on this matter.
The council communication does reference the statute, which requires that you ask for public comment.
Anyone care to comment on this matter before us? Just have a seat, choose your side, and give us your name.
I don't see my name here, but I'm Jay Roloff. And we're talking pennies here, I understand, but you asked for comments. I'm involved in the outreach at my church, and what we do is we try to find things that can help children in the community. We have a fund for that. It's called Coins for Kids, and on Communion Sundays, people take their change and they all throw it into a jar, but that mounts up, and we then use those funds to help kids, needy kids especially. And one of the things that we find it is useful, especially for Family Promise children, I think it's a 15-day swim pass or something like that. It's a pass that's sold at the community center so that you can get in to swim. And those kids love that. And so we're using funds that we're raising for a not-for-profit use, and so we're always interested in seeing those things spread as well as we can. To increase the swimming fee just makes for less kids that are going to be using the pool. Sometimes when you think about fees, it's different people have different requirements. So I'm just giving you one requirement against those swim passes.
Thank you. Anyone else? And that leads me to one. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Hoagland. Feel free to speak up and say something.
Sure. Could you define the difference between non-profit, private, and commercial? Mr. Chandler.
Let me find where I'm looking at on this so I make sure I understand it.
Any of the ball fields, the skate park, the pool, any of that, that has 3 different rates for nonprofit, private, and commercial.
Commercial would be a business, nonprofit would be a nonprofit organization, and private would be something like an individual family that's renting it.
And further, do you have the percentages or the breakdown as far as any of the ball fields or the skate park and the monies that have been charged to those 3 different entities?
Not with me, no, but I can get that.
And Ron, I had one last question. In most every aspect of life, I'm learning we have peak usage fees. Yet I don't see something like that here.
We have not charged a peak usage fee.
Is that an option to say, okay, that wouldn't necessarily hurt locals, but that we could capitalize on our peak summer months when we have visitors without making it so unaffordable? But it just, we bump our water rates, we bump our electric rates, but these seem to just stay static when there's a demand.
We can certainly look at that. It's not something we have done in the past, but I don't know if we've really ever looked at it. So if you're interested, we could look at it.
Well, I'm just trying to find any way to keep from raising the rates further.
Well, so just kind of a little bit by comparison. So when you're talking about the use of the pool, it's helpful to look at what you're actually doing is competing with for disposable income. It's not necessarily a comparison against other pools like Newport's or somewhere else. It's you're really competing about how people use their money for their leisure activities, whether that's the movies or something else. So we actually did a comparison. And so let me give you just a little bit on that. For example, an adult drop-in fee is $6. And this is a bowling alley in Toledo. It's $4 a game. To go to the cinema, it's between $7.75 and $9.50. To do a putt-putt or miniature golf, it's $6 for ages 12 and up. To go to the Theater West, it's $15. To go horseback riding, it's $90 an hour. To rent fat bikes, it's $10 an hour. To rent paddle boats is $20 an hour. And then paddle boards run $12 an hour. So when you're looking at what we're actually competing against, it is for the disposable income or the leisure income of the people that are using this. So I find that to be relevant to look at it. If people have a choice of spending $10, what are their options that are available? So we just have that for your information.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor, I would remind council that when we were going through the budget, this operation, the Community Rec Center, fees alone or its operational revenue only covers 40% of its expenses. So that means 60% of its expenses are borne by all the taxpayers in Lincoln City. Because if you haven't, you most likely get comments from people who live outside Lincoln City in the urban growth boundary, and they pay a little more for swimming or anything else, and of course complain about it. And then others who own property or pay property taxes in Lincoln City but live elsewhere also pay a little more, and it's because we get revenue from shared state funds and stuff, but it's based on census. My point being is we're trying to close a little bit the gap operationally. We know it won't pay for itself. We're not trying to make it pay for itself, but trying to keep, I think, the fees in line with still very much affordable, but recognize that everybody's, whether they use it or not, is paying for that community center. So, I hate percentages in this case because 10% and it's a 25-cent 10% increase, the 10% sounds horrendous, 25% isn't.
Yeah.
Mr. Chandler.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, Mr. Chandler, our utilities price, that doesn't raise for the summer, does it? I mean, that water?
Our water rate is, it's based upon usage, and so when it reaches a certain threshold, yes, it gets more expensive, which usually is going to take place in the summer because that's when people will water outdoors.
Okay, and the price per unit on gas and electrics all stay the same, right? Or do they have more expensive the higher the usage?
Is from our own usage of those things, I think they stay the same year-round, but I couldn't speak for everybody's.
Okay.
For just the city's usage, it's the same.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor. In addition to what Mr. Anderson said, that TRT also helps provide some of the funding too, not just the general fund. But as we're trying to get, as Mr. Roloff said about the children and getting the children in, how much this love that they do, and my own children love going there as well, the community center. Is there something that we can create or have that if they're doing well in school, they can get something like a, I don't know, coupon or something, or
Reward of some sort.
A reward to show that, yes, we're trying to get into this 45 to 50% of operating costs, but is there also something that we can show that, like, hey, we also care about the interaction that these kids have at the community center, and this is something that, the rock wall or the 15-day passes or something like that. Could we create something that can balance, because of, these children who, have such a great time there, who may not be able to do it and are trying to do good and stuff like that, is there something we can do for them, for that?
Sure, and we can certainly look at it if the council desires, so.
Council?
Well, I wouldn't see it as, Mr. Mayor, I wouldn't see it as a change of fees, but some kind of a coupon, a reward system, and so we could move ahead with the fee schedule and come back with some kind of, working with Gail, some kind of incentive.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would just, I'm not going to beat this dead horse, and I apologize, but during most of the budget resolution, I was dealing with a dying family member, so I wasn't here for much of that, so I didn't get to voice an opinion too much. And I'm not saying that fees shouldn't increase. Fees always go up. But I'm just seeing some glaring opportunities for greater income. And I can't just say, yeah, let's just raise these rates. I'd love to hear just a delay of just to the next meeting, to someone say, okay, here's what we think we can do. And then I'd give my wholehearted blessing to it. But I can't vote yes for this right now without just a little more information.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Mr. Chandler, is there any kind of time on this fee, is trying to get it in place for?
We're hoping that we can implement it on January 1st, and the real timeline is for the printing of the fall, or of the winter catalog for the community center, which I believe they go to print the end of November, 1st of December.
So we've got one more meeting to shoot for.
I think you can make it for one more meeting.
But it's up to council, of course.
Are we having a second meeting in November?
We will have we'll have a meeting next Monday that we have so far been looking at as a special council meeting. We actually had planned on that for one of the items that we moved up to tonight. If you want to vote on this next week, we can just advertise that as a special meeting. Otherwise, we would wait until.
Well, again, I'm not asking council to delay. If there's enough votes to pass it, I'm just saying I would be much more comfortable voting for it if I had that info.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think you raised some good points as well, where there might be some opportunity. So I think the next question is it feasible where Gail has an opportunity to look at those? I think there were only a few areas that the mayor had suggested, the room rental kind of stuff. And
well, yeah, I guess that's a good question.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, it doesn't. We're not tied to this. Once we say yes, it can still be raised.
Sure. We normally try to adopt these once a year, but there's nothing that would prohibit you from looking at it again.
And you'd have to bring that to us, though.
We would.
The Gail has no leeway in that, except going through you and then coming to us.
That's correct.
I'd make the motion then to approve Resolution 2017-20, resolution of the City of Lincoln City adopting revisions to the citywide fee schedule.
Second?
Motion and second, discussion? Roll call?
Anderson?
Yes.
Hoagland?
Yes.
Hinton?
Yes.
Walke?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
And Williams?
No.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate that, Ron. And everyone. All right. Back to the top here. That was it. Ordinances. Ordinance number 2017-20. You want to just read it, Mr. Capitello? I'm tired of reading.
Your Honor, Council, this is first reading of ordinance number 2017-20, an ordinance amending the Lincoln City Municipal Code, Title II, Administration and Personnel, Chapter 2.04, City Council, adding and amending council rules from Resolution 2008-47, and providing for enforcement. That's the first reading. Got that out of the way. I have only one change, and that's, well, two changes. One change is that Exhibit A is the council rules, and for the next reading, I'll bold and underline it so it's clear that Exhibit A is going into the code. If you read the codification section, Exhibit A is not excluded. Exhibit A is going to go into the code. So all of Exhibit A should have been bold and underlined. It's just a lot easier to read when it's not bold and underlined. So, but for the final version, I'll just make it clear it's going into the code. And the only one change in Section 5.3 of the language in Exhibit A, it talks about the fifth line down that, well, I'll just read the sentence. In addition to any other sanction imposed for violation of these rules, of this rule, improper disclosure of confidential information shall be deemed an act outside the course and scope of the disclosing official's agency relationship and the city, with the city, and should be shall, not may, subject the official to forfeiture of the protections under the Oregon Tort Claims Act, including the right to defense and indemnification for any damages or liability resulting from or relating to the disclosure of the confidential information. And so I'll go back and explain that, but I wanted to get the fact that the word may is in there. It should be shall. Council asked that I look at what other cities do with regard to transmission of confidential information to council. I looked at several other cities. A lot of the rules were much like ours. The city of Gresham's appeared to have at one point been ours. Theirs has been, however, amended. Some of the language in the beginning is exactly the same. It's possible that both Gresham and the city used somebody else's rules, and I couldn't find them. But they have amended their rules, and so there are two areas where I really looked into was the use of confidential information, and the corollary to that would be public records law as it relates to, especially as it relates to confidential communications, but also things that are not confidential. So under the existing council rules, we have the city charter, we have Chapter 204 of the code, and then we have Council Rules Resolution 2008-47. As part of this ordinance, I'm proposing that we take all the council rules in 2008-47, make them Exhibit A, which is what I've done, and incorporate them into the code. And this is because the charter says council may, by resolution or by ordinance, adopt rules to govern its activities. Well, why would you do something by resolution if the charter says by ordinance? So I want to correct that and adopt those rules by ordinance. So that's why they're incorporated into the code. With regard to the two issues, the confidential information issue, our current code says basically you can't disclose confidential information. No member of the council may disclose it to anyone. That includes executive session materials. Also, this is our rules resolution, says no one makes public statements or press releases about executive sessions or confidential records, and that the council may do a censure of a member for violating these rules. So again, that language is a decade old. It's got three important things: a prohibition, clarification, only someone who's authorized to make public statements can make public statements, and a sanction. But censure is kind of a slap on the wrist, public reprimand, kind of a remedy. It's not a real remedy. So I looked at what other jurisdictions do, and Gresham had fleshed this area out, and so they have a definition of what is confidential. And it includes the things you would typically expect to be confidential, like attorney-client, privileged, and things that are labeled confidential. It also then has a prohibition on disclosure of confidential information. Gresham then had a section called improper disclosure of confidential information, and talks about that is an act outside the course and scope of the agency's relationship. And you're familiar with this issue because in your orientations and in materials I've sent you, one of those materials was the Gov 101 video where your insurance CIS's attorney, Kirk Mylander, explains in the video in about 44 minutes that the mayor and councilors only have power when they act together. They have no power as individuals. So if an official, and this is him in the video, he talks about if an official takes a unilateral action, which it's basically outside the scope of their authority, and that will then subject them to the loss of the Oregon statute indemnification provisions. So that was in that video that you got as part of your training materials. And if you want to watch it again, I can send it out again. But that's kind of why changing may to shall is important. Your insurance company's attorney said, yeah, you are going to lose your protection if you're engaging in unilateral disclosure of confidential information or otherwise acting individually as opposed to as a group. So Gresham had actually taken that issue from that video and stuck it into their council rules resolution, which I thought was great. It's rare when you find something, plan comes together. So Gresham also had the issue about statements relating to confidential matters. Again, like your existing council rules resolution, it says, hey, only the people that are specifically authorized to disclose can disclose. And then on written and electronic communications, we had some question about how we really going to handle that. So, it's kind of a pain for you as a practical matter for me to hand out a written document at executive session and expect you to sit there and read it. Some of you are admittedly slow readers and you want it ahead of time. And others, it's just annoying to get something and then have to read it and digest it, and then you want to think about it more. So there's two methods we're talking about here, and one is we'll provide confidential information in coded written form or electronically to the official city email address with a no print option. So if I give each one of you a written document, there will be slight differences in each one of those documents, which I know and or my secretary knows. We've actually done this before. Whose copy is whose? There's a slight difference. So that's what I mean by coded written materials. So if your copy ends up in the newspaper, we'll know it was your copy and not one of the other counselors. So that's what I mean by coded materials.
Quick question on that, Mr. Amicello.
Yeah.
That doesn't alter the content of the message. We're not each getting a different message.
No, one would have, in the past, one document might have 2 periods at the end of a sentence, and that is marked on a code as being, that's the one that was given to Counselor Anderson. And somebody who got a semicolon in that same space may be another counselor. So we'll have a code, so we know it's oftentimes useful to keep track. I've had a case where I was sued in federal court and someone said, well, you disclosed to the newspaper this confidential matter. Well, we were able to prove that, in fact, the copy that was anonymously delivered to the newspaper was, in fact, the copy that they had received from the Ethics Commission. So it was, the federal case was dismissed, and there should have been a bar complaint, because it was actually the plaintiff who had actually disclosed and then tried to get damages for saying we did it. So it's a useful mechanism for written materials. For electronic materials, we have had a custom of sending the council an electronic document with password protection, and so we can continue that, but there's something you can do where you can restrict printing. And although there may be people that can get around it, depending on their level of expertise, the council rules would provide that you shall not print it. And the council rules would provide that, hey, it goes to the official city email address, and you shall not forward it to anyone else. So that's the matter. It's basically, it's refreshing to see Gresham having addressed it in this way. I thought it was thoughtful and far superior to ours. Although ours wasn't bad, this is a better, with some tweaks, this was a better rule. So I took this rule and with the changes that I recommended, and I inserted it into what was Council Resolution 2008-47, which is now Exhibit A. And I did the corollary to the electronic communications. I basically said, we don't have a lot in our code about public records. Of course, you all have to comply with public records, and there's a couple real important parts of that. One is, public record has to be retained in accordance with the Oregon Administrative Rules retention schedule. You're not allowed to just destroy public records. So if now, you can destroy a copy. Okay, so I had a question from a counselor today. Well, wait a minute, what if I recycled that? Well, if it was just a copy, you can recycle it. So as long as but if you create a record, we give you a document and you write all over it, that's now the record that has to be retained. So with regard to written documents and with regard to electronic communications that you have that concern city business, they have to be maintained. So the rule will be, for written records, you need to periodically turn them into the city recorder, and keeping in mind that, we don't need copies that haven't been written on. But if you've written notes or you've written on a document, an agenda item, you should keep it in a folder and then periodically bring it in and give it to the city recorder, and we'll keep a file. Now, that's for written records. For electronic records, the best rule seems to be that you use city email addresses for retention purposes. So you shall use the city official email address to communicate with anyone regarding city business. Use your personal email for personal matters, not for city business. If you inadvertently get a communication to your personal email account regarding city business, you will cover yourself from allegations that you've tampered with or destroyed public records by forwarding that to your official city email address, where it will get backed up by IT, and you do not have to worry about it retaining it. And you should communicate with whoever sent you that email to your personal email address that they should use the official city address if they're going to talk to you about city business. So, for example, if a constituent emails your personal email account and says, hey, I'm concerned about a street light at the corner of whatever and whatever, forward that email to your official city address, respond to them, copying the city address, saying, please direct all emails to the official city address, because they are retained in accordance with the retention schedule by IT. If you're not doing that, you're running the risk that you're not properly maintaining public records, and you could be subject to some real problems. So with those, and so what I did was I took some language from Gresham about public records, and I again installed it into our code with some tweaks. I added a definition. I was a little bit clearer about city business being some of our language, so that city business is, in fact, doesn't matter if it's on your personal email account, it's still a public record, and that we need you to be forwarding these messages so that they can be properly retained in accordance with the retention schedule, and you can avoid any problems such as tampering with public records or violation of the retention schedule in the Oregon Administrative Code. So with that, that's the long version of what I did and why I did it. I did also separately send you all other councils' codes, because as I got into this, I wanted to do more, but I restrained myself to the issues that you asked me to look at. But there's a lot of things, some of them very helpful things, in the Gresham Code and the City of Ashland Code, which I sent you, about how to operate a meeting. And those weren't things that here are frequent motions that you're going to have and things like that. And I didn't include those in this because that wasn't my charge, but I'm suggesting that maybe by separate motion after we get past the readings on this, that you maybe direct either me to look at the bigger picture, look at all council rules, and update them, or maybe you want to create a subcommittee or have a work session and talk about some of those other rules you may like from the other jurisdictions that I sent you. So with that, I'm looking for approval of first reading, and if it's unanimous, we'll move on to second.
I have a question, if I may, first. I'm concerned with 2.04.170, violation of council rules, B, investigation. The council may investigate the actions of any member of the governing body and may meet in executive session. I'm assuming we have to have a meeting to say we're going to investigate, or each council is just going to talk to each other and say, hey, we need to have an investigation, whereby we've then had an open meeting violation.
Yeah, you can always act in open session, but part of the, in the past couple of years, we've had this issue of, hey, can we have executive sessions to talk about these matters? So, and can you initiate an investigation? So I'm just providing some clarity, and I stole this from, I believe this is from the League of Oregon Cities sample, where, just to provide some clarity, yes, you can do an investigation. If you're going to go into executive session, you should probably give that notice to the person who's being alleged to have done something, and give them the opportunity to request a public hearing. Although you can, under the confidential provisions of the executive session law, you can go into executive session under other sections. I thought it was appropriate, since we've had some discussion about this, to follow that recommendation. So,
No, I agree. I just wanted to make sure, I guess as I reread it, it says the council, not councilors.
yeah.
So just as long as it's going as a body.
In open session or in executive session, you can, of course, you can't really take action in executive session. You can come to consensus, and you got to come down the hall and act.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilor Hinton?
Okay.
Councilor Hinton?
Okay. On page 24, under confidential matters, the written and electronic materials,
The printed page 24? Or
packet
computer
page.
24?
Computer. I was just curious about this one part. Electronic materials shall not be printed or copied or forwarded from official city email addresses. So the word copied kind of caught my attention, and I thought, well, what about a screenshot? Or what about a photograph, from my phone?
Obviously, there are ways. The council rule is, hey, don't copy it. Don't disseminate this confidential information. If you get sent a document and it doesn't have a print option, can you get around it? Yeah, I guess you could sit there and you can handwrite what it says. You could take a picture of it with your cell phone. There are ways around this. But the council rule would be, don't disseminate that information. And I should add something here, is the last part of this ordinance talks about what the sanction is. And this is, again, not Exhibit A, but the actual text of the ordinance. So right now, you have a rather anemic sanction, which is censure, slap the wrist. But we have in our code, we have a provision which was added in 2013, I believe, that says if the code doesn't specify the level of classification of a violation, it is a Class B violation. And Class B, given the change we made a year or so ago, is a $1,000 offense. Okay, that's the penalty. There's a different presumptive fine because we mirror the state law. So if you violate a council rule, you could be cited for violation of the code, and the default penalty will apply. So, but who can cite you, okay? Is the code enforcement officer going to give you a citation? No. The council needs to police themselves. So the council could vote to issue a citation to a member who violates council rules, Exhibit A, or any of the incorporated provisions. So, and that's not really a change to the way the code is now, because the code has had the default penalties since 2013, but we really haven't talked about that penalty, that sanction. So I didn't want to leave it so that code enforcement officers would issue citations for council rules. Council governs the conduct of itself.
So that leaves the council to determine an investigation is warranted, to investigate, to convict, and then to fine?
No, remember, the due process, okay, the council can decide to investigate. They can do so here at an open meeting, they can do so in an executive session, and then come down here and pass a motion. If the council conducts a due process hearing, the council's only sanction is censure, or for one offense under the city charter, removal from office. Interference with administration is specifically references removal. But if it's a violation, the council has basically censure except for one offense. That's it. Slap on the wrist. So, looking for
humiliation is not necessarily a slap on the wrist.
But a $1,000 fine is something that you might take into consideration if you're violating the rules. And of course, that's not for the council to decide. The council can decide. No, the council, this is one of the options. One of the options is due process hearing, council censure. Due process hearing for violation of interfering with administration, removal from office, or censure. But if council says, okay, we think that there's enough here for a citation, vote down here to issue a citation. Citation issued, goes to court.
Okay.
The judge gives you a violation hearing under, just like all other violations.
Okay.
So there's your due process, separate process from the council.
That's clear.
It just gives you a remedy that's not, it's still internal. It can be to circuit court or to municipal court, and you could use a pro tem judge. But it's another remedy for violation of council rules. And again, I just didn't make that up. It's really what the code provides for now, but we've never really been clear about that as a remedy, so I'm specifying it.
I think someone else had a question. Then I heard. Ron?
Not a question, but just a comment. Mr. Appicello and I discussed quite extensively the investigation point, and my concern as this was being drafted was actually the employees that might be involved in these kind of things. And the reason why the term "the council" is so important is that the staff is not authorized to initiate, nor is any one council member authorized to initiate it through the staff. It's the council that has to instruct the staff to do anything. I think that is sufficient to prevent the staff from getting caught in the middle of something that we really don't want to be in the middle of.
Anybody else?
Mr. Mayor,
Question from Mr. Oh, go ahead.
I guess, I've got to, if I could thank Mr. Apicello for limiting the proposed council rules to only 10 pages versus the 28 for Gresham. So, way to cut it down. If I can, my question is, did I understand you to say earlier that the underlining of the council rules, when I was reading the council rules, I was trying to remember what previous council rules were and what was new. So you indicated that the next version for the second reading would have underlined?
Well, again, the Exhibit A is all new to be added to the code. When you look at the council communication, I've shown you the two sections that I'm basically substituting in existing Resolution 2008, but we're not keeping Resolution 2008-47. We're just taking the rules that are contained there, making them Exhibit A, and substituting two sections, basically they're shown in full in the council communication. We're taking the section here that we have, we're wiping it out, and we're installing this language. I can, if you'd like, strike through in the council communication. I'll show you the change in Exhibit A from Resolution 2008-47. But since it was never in the code, the convention of striking it and underlining it doesn't really apply. But since it's going into the code, I'll underline the whole thing.
Well, I agree with 99% of what you got here, and I appreciate you two doing all this work. I just hate this, I'm kind of going with Mr. Anderson here, is I would love to have a work session and just go, let's just do this all at once. Let's just hash this out. I don't know that there's a giant need for this tonight, but to put it together in a thoughtful analysis in a whole, as a whole, and just say, okay, here's where we need to improve, here's what we need to change. I would feel a whole lot better in voting for that than this right now. Unless someone can tell me there's an immediate need to change this tonight.
Mr. Mayor, if I may. Yes, please. What's the motion to make?
The motion will be approval of first reading, and if it's unanimous, we could move to second reading. If not, then the charter would require that it be continued for second reading to the next meeting.
Make a motion to approve first reading.
Second.
Motion to second, discussion? Well, again, I'm just going to state my same objection. I don't know the hurry, and I'd like to see this incorporated as a discussion on the whole. Any other discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I don't know what that means, but, so let me ask mine, because what I want to be able to do is read the rules again, but with better understanding of what's new in it. And from what I gather, that would give us a time by not doing the second reading tonight, see it, and could make changes, if there were any, prior to the second reading. Because when I read it before, I was comfortable with most things. Some just popped out and minor, but I wanted to make sure. So I guess I didn't see a work session. I just wanted to make sure, a little wordsmithing here or there, or further definition of what was meant by it.
Well, I think what Mr. Apicello had mentioned it, or just set up a subcommittee or have a work session to talk about all of the council rules as a general discussion, right?
Yeah, there was basically two ideas here. One is proceed immediately with this, because it's what you asked me to bring back. I restrained myself. I brought back only what you asked. But if you want to pour over those 26 pages or whatever from the City of Gresham and see if there's anything in there you like and you want to add it, maybe some of you don't, but I ask that if you want to do that, we do it later at a work session or a subcommittee. But this, I thought, was fairly precise to what you had asked me to do.
Any further discussion? Roll call.
Hinton,
Yes.
Wolke,
Yes.
Ward,
Yes.
Williams,
No.
Anderson,
Yes.
and Hoagland.
Yes.
So I will return with council communication, which fleshes out a little bit what the differences is between Exhibit A here and Resolution 2008-47. And we'll do second reading on December, this week? We usually have to do it at least 6 days away, so December 11th, if that's acceptable.
All right, and then ordinance 2017-22.
Your Honor, Counsel, this is ordinance 2017-22. First reading, an ordinance of the City of Lincoln City amending the Lincoln City Municipal Code, adding a new Chapter 8.13, distressed residential property registration, to address registration and maintenance of foreclosed and vacant properties. Ask for approval of first reading, and if unanimous, move on to second reading. By way of explanation, the Oregon statutes were amended a few years ago to require that cities provide for the registration of vacant properties that are going through foreclosure, to make sure that we have someone to contact for compliance with our basically property maintenance provisions and nuisance provisions of the code. So this ordinance kind of tracks that statute, which I believe I sent you some of the supporting ORS provisions so that you didn't have to go look in the code. We have an exhibit there. I borrowed some of this language from the League of Oregon Cities. They kind of had a model, but I did make some changes to make it fit better with our code. So with that explanation, again, we have to do this per the changes to the legislative statutes. So I ask for approval of first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to second, discussion?
I have a couple questions. Is there a provision like this for commercial property as well?
No, the statute was very specific to vacant and foreclosed residential property. I had that same thought, and I went and looked at it, and I don't know why it's limited to residential.
Curious. Okay. My second question is, on page 40, under maintenance, line 11, it says free of weeds. And even in the best of times, you'll find a weed or two, and no offense, Joseph, in our yard. But, so could that be like a height of a weed, like a foot or 9 inches or whatever? I mean, I don't even know what would be aesthetically unpleasing.
Yeah, even dead vegetation, you're going to not be on top of it at all times. But I'd say maybe excessive weeds. You add the word excessive.
Is there,
I think-
what's the word you use when you wanted to say what the average person would consider?
Normal. But my point is that weeds are weeds are one thing, but if we're talking about if you're driving by and you think, oh, that house isn't kept up, and a visual take of it, it seems to be it's more of the height of the weed than it
Well,
is.
it is all kind of qualified with that give the appearance the property is vacant or abandoned. So it's probably it looks like it's qualifying all that. Again, I generally free of weeds.
I think it's part of the whole that kind of clarifies it. Yeah. Any,
The other, Mr. Mayor, I guess as I was reading this, I wondered about the impact on staff and, another item to capture and record and track.
This would fall under the duties of our code enforcement officer.
One of the changes I made to the model was I did not have the information come in and be filed with the city recorder, because then it said, oh, it all needs to also then be transmitted by the recorder to the code enforcement officer. Why do that? Why not just have it go to the code enforcement officer directly? So Kathy was very happy that I cut her out of it. Chief, maybe not so much.
So, Counselor, in answer, yes, it would increase the workload. The amount, I don't know, because I don't know the extent of the problem that may exist, but it would fall in line with the character of that job.
And Your Honor, Counsel, the idea, I believe, is to try to avoid extra work by putting a registration requirement on the owners and the banks to basically inform us, and we could cite them for not complying with the registration requirement, which is a lot easier than maybe going through a whole nuisance abatement process.
Anyone care to make a motion?
Yeah, I
It- it-
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yes, we're in discussion. Thank you. Yeah. All right, any further discussion? All right, hearing none, roll call. Let's get you 2 seconds.
Walke?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Hoagland?
Yes.
And Hinton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Your Honor, Counsel, this is second reading ordinance 2017-22, an ordinance of the City of Lincoln City amending this Lincoln City Municipal Code, adding a new Chapter 813, distressed residential property registration, to address registration and maintenance of foreclosed and vacant properties. Ask for approval of second reading and adoption of the ordinance.
So moved.
Second.
Motion second, discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Wait.
Oh,
Coming up to the mic. My question is this. When I was thinking about graffiti removal and anyway, am I on the wrong spot?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
you're one
I need
ahead.
to go home.
Yeah, so we're just doing second reading, so any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Walke?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Williams?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Hoagland?
Yes.
And Hinton?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Your Honor, Counsel, this is first reading of ordinance 2017-23, an ordinance of the City of Lincoln City amending the Lincoln City Municipal Code, amending Chapter 8.12 nuisances, adding a new Section 8.12095 to address graffiti, amending Chapter 8.10 property maintenance, adding a new provision to exterior property maintenance to address graffiti. I did make a mistake on this ordinance in that I failed to underline and bold the text in Section 4 that is being added, and this is not really the it's not really the graffiti issue, it's the inspection and abatement warrant issue. So Section 812155, inspection and abatement warrants, is all new, so it all should be bold and underlined. I won't read it because that's the only change, is that it all needs to be underlined. All the text is there. And this isn't really a change. Ever since the city of Portland got sued and lost for entering onto a residential property in a nuisance abatement action and throwing away someone's pioneer table, which was underneath some flower pots and tires and things like that. And they got sued, and someone said, oh, well, my great-grandpa brought that across the plains in the covered wagon, why it was out in the yard underneath the flower pots and the tires, but they still won. And so ever since then, Portland has obtained a warrant before they went in and performed the abatement. So basically, and everybody, I mean, this is 20 years ago, everybody has recommended you get consent to do the abatement, or if they don't give you consent, you do an abatement warrant. Now, that's different than the inspection warrant. If you want to go just inspect to see if there are violations, you go get an inspection warrant or consent. abatement warrant is you've gone through some due process already. You gave an opportunity to have a hearing to dispute whether or not it was a nuisance. And after the due process hearing is done, you still have to respect the search and seizure provisions, and you still get an abatement warrant to cover yourself. So I installed this language, and I believe I took it right from the Portland Code, because it was, obviously they've been dealing with this for 20 years. So, and it's not really any different than the process we would normally follow. So with that, I'd ask for approval of first reading.
Move to approve ordinance number 2017-23, first reading.
Second.
Motion and a second, discussion?
Now I have something. Sorry about that. I just found that the only property, we have different property ownerships, obviously, in Lincoln City, and the only property that ownership type that I found that would have difficulty with this removing of the graffiti within 10 days are those people who own property of second homes. And I just wanted to throw that out there because they don't have a management company, they don't have a local somebody, and how do they even know that there's graffiti on there? And maybe they're, I mean, it just, to me, it just seems like a complication for people who own second homes.
And that actually is an issue for any kind of property maintenance problem. Someone breaks your window out under your code, you're violating the property maintenance ordinance because one of your openings is not kept up. We give you notice to the best of our ability, and once we complied with the notice requirement of the nuisance ordinance, we can proceed. Now, it's a lot of work for the city, and it takes money to perform abatement. So we'd much prefer that you took care of your own property. So we're going to notify you. You're going to have 10 days from when we send you notice, or I believe it's 12 days from if we mail the notice, 10 days if we personally serve you, for you to address the issue. And if you don't, we'll probably do a follow-up before we go further. And again, we have to have money in the budget. You should always keep this in mind when you're wanting to make the city look better. You got to put money in the code enforcement abatement fund when you go through the budget process. So otherwise, our only option is to order people to do it.
I have a few questions. So, is there more of a definition of unauthorized? I mean, I think, you can paint in a graffiti style, and it's authorized by the homeowner. Is that going to follow? Is that going to be against that?
I believe unauthorized would commonly be understood as being without the consent of the owner.
Okay.
So I don't think we need to go to a definition. It's possible that some of the ordinances on graffiti, I seem to recall somebody did put in a definition of unauthorized, but I think the common understood meaning would be you don't have permission of the owner.
Okay, cool, thank you. Also, like the public, is it the public right-of-way or open to the public, does that include bathrooms?
Premises open to the public, such as public rights-of-way or other publicly owned property. I don't know that we're talking about the interiors. I mean, are you thinking that a private business, someone's graffiti?
Or our own? I mean,
well, but
I'm looking at places where there is graffiti.
Yeah, and our own staff obviously would address graffiti, and if the manager wanted to, tell staff, hey, if you don't get this graffiti abatement done, we're violating our own nuisance ordinance, so we don't ever want to be in that condition and get it done. So I think we're kind of giving ourselves a time frame because even though this is regulating private property, we're going to want to comply with our own ordinance.
And I saw that it said etchings, and so I know, painting is one thing, but now if you're talking about mirror glass, I mean, that's a significant amount more money than just slapping some paint on it. So that's where I went with, when I saw etchings and carvings, that's why I went to the bathroom and mirrors and glass and things like that. I mean, if you're looking at storefront windows that people pass by, as I'm a glazer, I mean, I change out windows. It's not a cheap thing. So, so that's where I was concerned with that as well. That's what led me there. And then in section 4, it has manager, and then is that the city manager? And then it switches to manager or designee. So I was just those, if there could be more clarification for me, it was line 2 on page 64, packet page 64, and it said manager, and then manager designee. So
I have this feeling that the definition section of the nuisance ordinance, I think one of you emailed me and asked me a question about that, and I pointed out that the definition section included the definition of manager, which included manager or designee.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't remember that.
Well, I think too, the question of, you say, glass being, I've got a couple windows in my building that are scratched up. I could tell you, yeah, I'm good with them, and that should remove the problem of it being authorized, right? If I say it's okay, it's
If
authorized.
you're saying it was authorized, then it's not unauthorized.
Yeah.
I just don't, but I think that that's not the intent, obviously.
No, but I'm going along with what Mr. Hoagland was saying. I don't want someone from the city coming to me saying, hey, someone scratched your windows, now spend $400 to replace it. I'm going to say, no, I like it, but I'm going to leave it there.
Put a sticker on it.
Oh, yeah, or I'll get some acid and make a nice pattern on it or something, but, yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry, Councilor Anderson, you were up next.
But you raised a good question, because I hadn't thought of it, but the public bus glass enclosures often are targets of etched art, and
Yeah, that's why we switched to the
we're going to become a real fan of county transit if we are demanding all the time of them replacing that glass. So, I'm just trying to think through. I don't see room for exception here.
Well, I think it goes back to the authorized. If the city manager says, yeah, I'm good with it, it's okay. We're getting it where someone hasn't been allowed to say, there's a building near one of mine, an old abandoned gas station that's been tagged for, I don't know how many years, on the back on the west side. I can't imagine that'd be authorized, but maybe it's art. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, any further discussion?
So I guess the only, I always like to have wiggle room and exception. So is that really the answer to the exception that, as I look at the attorney, that all the owner has to do is say it's authorized?
Well,
I mean,
I'm looking at the definition in the city of Portland, and they've got unauthorized without the consent of the owner or the occupant. I could add a definition of unauthorized, and we could add to this section, we're adding a definition of graffiti. We could add unauthorized for purposes of the ordinance means without the consent of the owner or the occupant prior to the installation, prior to the graffiti. Yeah, that would take away the after the fact, I'm okay with it.
Mr. Mayor, maybe the attorney just didn't understand what I was looking for. I'm looking for flexibility, not, clamping down tighter, especially with Councilor, Casper not here, who instigated this graffiti stuff anyway. So what I'd like to hear is to make sure someone with a reasonable mind can exercise some flexibility.
Okay, I think if you approve first reading this evening and ask that we bring it back for second reading, I can try to find some flexibility that you're requesting. Of course, my natural tendency is go right to tougher.
Right.
Excuse me, but we're only talking about etching for a little flexibility, right? Not the paint graffiti.
Basically, you're asking me, and to the mayor's point, can the owner consent to leaving it the way it is, or is it such that it needs to be addressed? And probably the only factor that comes into play here is a lot different than, the cost of a can of paint versus the cost of replacing a window. So if you want me to explore that, don't do both readings this evening.
Yeah, because I think, I don't know if it's a fine line, but the difference between graffiti and vandalism. So, say my windows at my building, they've been scratched. There's nothing profane, there's nothing, it's just my window's scratched. Technically, could that be graffiti versus vandalism?
Well, it's all, graffiti and scratching is criminal mischief. Okay, so the owner did not authorize it, and it's damage. And criminal mischief, of course, it varies the level of offense based upon the value. So criminal mischief to public utility is a felony, whereas, criminal mischief less than $100 in value is I think, a C misdemeanor. So that's a difference recognized in the statutes based on value. So you're basically a victim if your property is vandalized or subjected to graffiti. And so eventually, the criminal justice system should provide for restitution to the victim for damage. Yes, I understand that the wheels of justice sometimes move slowly, and maybe property crimes are not the highest priority down at the DA's office, but if we actually did follow through, we would, and the city, is vandalized, and the city does catch perpetrators, and they do submit restitution requests to the city manager. So it does happen.
Assuming they're caught. Again, I just want to get to the point, and I'll stop beating this horse, but I don't want the city coming to my door saying, you've got scratches on your windows, replace them. That just seems completely out of line, yet seems to be addressed here.
Mr. Mayor. I see the etching or scratching or marking up of a window to damage the surface of it differently than I do graffiti. For example, if I own a building and I'm maybe not happy with the city or not happy with my neighbor, and some kid came along and used his paint can and it disturbed my neighbor, but I liked disturbing my neighbor, then I could say, hey, I'm fine with this. So I think we need to be pretty clear for giving some wiggle room for the glass, that we don't give wiggle room for the paint graffiti, even if I liked it.
Mr. Ward?
My experience in the last few years, 10 years, is that the city, we haven't had a problem with over-enforcement. We have had a severe problem with under-enforcement. So, picking on an outlier, thinking that it's going to be a common problem, they're all going to be in there inspecting our windows. You play hell to get the city to come when your neighbor has 2 or 3 broken windows out in a dead car, So, anyway, that's all I have to say.
And is that for discussion? Kathy, roll call.
Ward,
Yes.
Williams,
No.
Anderson,
Yes.
Hoagland,
Yes.
Henton,
Yes.
and Walke.
Yes.
Motion carries.
I'll return on December 11th for a second reading.
And looking at,
And I'll
or at least have.
try to address
side.
the flexibility issue.
Resolutions none. We did our special orders of business. City manager, city attorney report.
No.
Good.
No,
9.
What did I miss?
Skipped one.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, which one we inserted, thank you. Well, that's after my city manager report. Somebody did that to me. Agnes Creek property purchase. Now, before you go on, was this the one that okay, so I'm going to recuse myself as I have a actual conflict of interest, as my wife is a employee of the representing real estate firm.
Are we doing we're doing the Agnes Creek and then the personal service agreement?
I have Agnes Creek on mine, and that's all I have. So if you want to do, we can do that now, or we can plug the other one in. I'm just telling you what I got on my K9. I've got L9, I don't have a K9.
Well, you've got the old version then, and
I guess so. Take your pick, folks, I don't really care. It doesn't matter. You want to do the other one, Ron?
Let's do K9, because I've got
Let's do
more than
K9,
just
which I
this
don't
on
even
the
have here.
manager's report.
Recusing himself.
Well, that's L9.
Oh, yeah, yes, I know. Sorry. That was deep.
But let's go ahead and do the one about the police building, because I have a few other things besides the Agnes Creek property on my,
Perfect.
yeah.
I don't have it on mine at all.
It's under your belt.
Yes. I can wear
Evening, Mayor, City Council. In moving forward with the police facility project, as you recall, some time ago, we hired an architect, FFA architect firm. The next contractor that we needed to hire was an owner's representative, and if you recall during the presentation, the purpose of the owner's representative is to look out for the city's interest in this whole project, make sure the architect is doing what the city wants the architect to do. Later on down the road, when we hire the construction manager, general contractor, to make sure they are doing what the city wants them to do in concert with the architect and stuff. So a while ago, we, actually on March 15th, quite a while ago, we released a initial request for proposal based upon qualifications for owner representative services for the police facility project. We received one response from that particular RFP that was due on April 12th. That company was interviewed on May 24th, and based upon that interview, city staff attempted to negotiate a professional services agreement. Between May 24th and October 3rd, it was obvious that we were not going to be able to come to a satisfactory terms of agreement. I asked the proposed firm to draft me a scope of work 4 separate times, and I didn't get what I wanted, so we decided to rebid the project to do that. In rebidding the project, we redefined the qualifications. The prior qualifications were looking for owners' representatives that have been directly involved in police buildings. And I believe it was more than one. I believe it was at least 2, if not 3. There's not very many firms that were qualified to do that on that definition. So the more recent RFP that we released based upon the qualifications was at least a public, that they have conducted themselves as owner's representative for public service buildings or a public building, so they understand the Oregon laws regarding public purchasing, public buildings and stuff, and preference would be given to those who may have been involved with a police or fire department, some sort of emergency service type project. When we released those, we actually came up with some choices. We received 5 proposals. Those proposals were reviewed. City staff interviewed 4 of the 5 proposers. One of them was deemed to be not responsive to the actual request for proposal. Based upon the review of the 4 proposals and the interview of those 4 folks, the city recommends the services of the Klosh Group for owners' representative services. I'm just asking for the city council to allow city staff, i.e. me, to negotiate a professional services contract with the Klosh Group for the owners' representative services. It's a mouthful. And then once we can agree on a contract, then that contract would be brought for you for your final approval. But tonight, I'm just asking for permission to negotiate in those terms.
May I ask a question? Of those that you interviewed and you selected this one that you'd like to move forward with, was there something outstanding or a reason that you felt that they were the better fit for this project?
Yes, the two people who came in representing the firm were very professional. They were very kind of clicked with the city staff. They did a recent project with the Portland Fire Department that turned out to be absolutely gorgeous. So they had the experience with emergency services type buildings. They also had experiences with projects on the coast. They're the owner's representative for the remodel for the Seaside Civic Center. So their understanding of those unusual coastal issues that come with constructions, and I thought that was a big benefit for that as well.
Mr. Mayor, or Chief, will we get, or have the opportunity to just, not that it's going to hold this up, but the scope of work about what the owner's representative does?
Yes, that'll be identified in the professional services agreement that I'll bring back for you.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Please.
do you have an idea, ballpark, what the money range are we talking about?
If I told you, I'd probably be wrong, and they'd prove me wrong, but I believe it's about, generally, it's about 2.5% to 3% of the project cost. And that's kind of a rule of thumb.
That'd be 200 or 300,000?
Yeah, about that.
So I guess a couple more questions. We just had a meeting with the League of Oregon Cities, and it was their contention that Lincoln City may be in the crosshairs of a lawsuit by the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association, trying to say that the vehicle that we're using, I think it was revenue, yeah, that should be spent other places. When we're committing to these people for, like we've committed to the architect for $1 million, and your guys maybe $300,000, what happens if we get into litigation? Is there a way to back out of these things? Are we going to be on the hook for products that we haven't used?
No. So most of these contractors, like the architect, this person, there would be a fee not to exceed of, and then based upon that, it's based upon current time and materials spent. So we'd only be billed for the work that they actually did up to a point, and if we needed to back out of it, we would not be on the hook for the remainder of that cost. It's just time and materials up to whatever point we are at that time.
Thank you. Oh, by the way, when I referred to EVs, I was talking actually about a Tesla. And those will.
You're real specific.
Yes. And a lot of police agencies are using them, and they're controversial, of course, but they have a long lifespan and they're fast as can be. And I thought it was a lure for your new recruits. Put them behind the wheel of a Tesla. You may never see them again, but.
Well, maybe the chief would have to be the program director on this testing evaluation first.
Well, it would be fun to order one to see if it worked for us. So anyway, that's why I brought that up.
Mr. Mayor.
Please.
So the document says that it's no less than, or I'm sorry, a minimum, I just lost it, minimum of 25,000 and a maximum of 100,000. It was authority in Part D, but it says is anticipated to be more than 25,000 per year, but less than $100,000 per year. The local contract review board through the city manager to solicit. So that's saying that it could be more than $100,000, but maybe not. And how many years are they going to be our professional services, professional contractor? I don't know what the title would be. How long would the Klosh Group be contracted through us then?
Your Honor, counsel, I think that that's the code provision, which includes both the exemption for not going through the qualification-based selection, and the reference to the rule for qualification-based selection if you're over 100. I believe the council communication says that they follow the rule for qualification-based selection,
Oh, okay, not that, that's that.
not the exemption, yes.
Thank you for the clarification.
But to answer your other question, as far as how long they'd be on,
Sure.
it'd be until the building's
Oh,
completed.
all right, cool.
Mr. Ward gone. Anyone else have a question for the chief? Thank you, chief. I guess we're looking for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'd move to authorize city staff to negotiate a professional service contract to provide owners' representative services from the Klosh Group for the Lincoln City Police Facility Project.
Second.
Motion second, discussion. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Anderson?
Yes.
Hoagland?
Yes.
Hinton?
Yes.
Walke?
Yes.
Ward? And Williams?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. All right, now, do you want to do the Agnes Creek? You want to do your reports?
Agnes Creek would be fine.
All right, I'm going to reiterate my conflict of interest on this. I have an actual conflict, as my wife is not an employee, a broker with the firm representing one of the parties.
Good to know. There you go.
Yeah, and there we go. Council President,
Is that
you're up.
sir?
Okay.
Okay. Are you ready?
Okay, yeah, this is, should the city council authorize city staff to negotiate a professional services, oops, wrong place. Here it is. Should the city council authorize the city manager to negotiate and to complete the property purchase transition based on the executive summaries provisions? Ron?
Okay, we have discussed this. It is 5 acres that is located within the Agnes Creek open space. The property location is the 800 block of Southwest Dune Avenue. The property size, as I mentioned, is 5 acres. The price is $75,000. The method of payment is cash. The escrow amount, which is $1,000, would be split between the buyer and the seller. The taxes, this is one of the things that we discussed. The city shall not be responsible for any taxes as a result of the change of the forest land designation. And then the sellers have asked that the city provide a memorial, such as a plaque, bench, or other to be determined in the name of Phil and Faith Cook, who are the grandparents of the seller. You had asked at a previous meeting about what we have spent on other open space properties. You'll find on your desk in front of you a little worksheet. The upper part of this worksheet shows the prices, the year, the acres, the total price, and the price per acre that we have spent on open space. They have ranged from a low of $7,989 per acre to a high of $70,300 per acre. The one to note is that Agnes Creek, which was purchased in 2001, was $14,959 per acre. This property would come out to $15,000 an acre.
Your Honor, there was, counsel, there was one thing that I requested that we didn't get, and they responded and said, we made changes you requested, and then when I looked at the document, the language isn't there. So I'm going to read the language and ask that you specifically, again, incorporate this language as part of the request that they revise the document to add this. The parties contemplate that pursuant to ORS 308A-709, the acquisition of the property for parks and open space purposes by the city will not trigger a requirement to pay or create a lien for deferred taxes. Buyer and seller acknowledge that buyer cannot use taxpayer dollars to pay seller's deferred taxes. Accordingly, in the event additional taxes are levied as contemplated in paragraph 26, through loss of deferment or otherwise, seller and not buyer shall be responsible for payment of such deferred taxes. Buyers shall be responsible for all other taxes, that is, excluding deferred taxes, which may be imposed on the property after acquisition. there's a provision in the contract, and I believe it's paragraph 26, that says, unless otherwise provided, the buyer pays any taxes that spring up. Well, and I said to them, we want to otherwise provide. And so I asked for this language, but it did not get added to the addendum, so I'd like to request that it be added.
Okey-dokey. Time to make a motion. Yes? Did I do? I think I said something. Time to make a motion. Should the city council authorize the city manager to negotiate and complete the property purchase transaction based upon the executive summary provisions?
So moved, provided that what would you call it? Addendum gets added to the agreement?
Second.
A second?
Language, yeah.
Motion- We got a motion and a second. Discussion.
Good deal.
Well, note that it started out for more than that, and we did our job. Okay, since we're spending money, Kathy, you're up.
Counselor Hoagland, did you second it?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Hoagland?
Yes.
Hinton?
Yes.
Walke?
Yes.
Ward?
Yes.
Williams? And Anderson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Council President. City Manager, City Attorney reports.
Okay. The other thing I have, Mr. Mayor and council, is just some dates to remember. This is a very busy week. Tomorrow, beginning at 4, from 4 to 7, is the open house for the Imagine Comprehensive Plan Citizens Outreach. It will be at the Community Center from 4 o'clock until 7 o'clock. We are also included with that will be the branding campaign. I will be having a display along with the Imagine to talk to people about that. We are also hosting one of our focus groups that evening at 5:30. Additionally, the Parks Board is meeting Wednesday night, and then on Friday night, we are hosting 2 focus groups. Thursday, we are hosting a focus group with the Kiwanis Club, and then Friday, we're hosting 2 more focus groups for the branding campaign. The other reminder is that next Monday at 5:30, we will have a work meeting, and we are, at this point, are not scheduled to have another city council meeting this month.
Again, the time, please, on Monday?
5:30.
5:30, thank you.
And we will be discussing the concepts for the village's master plan update.
Anything else?
No, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Capcello. Okay. We had no work session or executive session. Additional comments from citizens present on non-agenda items? We got a room full of people. Nobody wants to say a word? Oh, well, Jay, you're welcome to. Okay, seeing none then. Announcements or comments by City Council?
Mr. Mayor, I too, if you want to add to dates, this coming Wednesday evening, if you need something to do, at 6 p.m. at the Community College Lincoln City campus, the Oregon Coast Community College Board is actually meeting. And so, again, remember that they're elected folks doing the work of the community college, but they move around to the different campuses, and they're in Lincoln City on Wednesday night at 6. The other, I just bring up, because I find how easy it is for us to keep adding to the workload of staff, and it seems prioritization gets lost. So my concern is things that we think are being worked on, we don't know. And if I can, just because he's here, if I could pick on the attorney, because it's been a couple of meetings since he's really been worked over. But, I appreciate these ordinances that we worked on tonight, but The graffiti one, just came up a meeting ago. And bingo, here it is, an ordinance. And but I went through some of my notes and said, gee, I wonder where some of the other things are. And the cultural center lease would be one that I wonder about. In the Regatta Park deed issue where commercial booths couldn't be at Regatta Park, and things like that. So the power of a counselor asking for something, and it gets done. So we need to figure out a way that the projects that we think we've asked for, and we probably have, get piled on staff's desks. And, and now I'm being serious, not to jump on the attorney because he's trying to get a lot of work done, but, I'm betting he needs help prioritizing those things that we've put forth. And I don't know how to do that, but I've got other ones that I've kind of been, looking for, the memorials. If you remember, after the passing of Gary Ellingston, and the idea of a street name. And we tied it in, or at least I tied it into, that whole, the memorial getting a bank, a bench or something. And here we got Agnes Creek land that the buyer or seller has asked for something. So I'm wondering out loud, how do we assist staff in prioritizing their workload? Because again, Ron sent us a 2-page item, which I really appreciated because to me it really showed up and beyond. I underlined, this does not include daily duties of staff. These are, and it just shows we're piling on to these guys. And my concern is, perhaps the important things, mine, aren't getting done. I don't have an answer, but all these, as it comes to the end of the year.
Well, if I may,
Sure.
I know when I do my planner, there's always the A1s, B1s, C1s, and then those are open to revision. But this has to be done. This must be done. This is nice to get done. And I'm wondering if there's a way to do that once a month. As a council, we just look at it and say, okay, is this still a priority? Does it still move up the list? Or do we have to get these others done? Because I like the idea of having just a reminder in front of me that we can assign a priority to.
I don't know
That's
how,
not even a bad
Mr.
idea.
Appicello, now that I've poked fun at you, I mean.
Okay.
Maybe you could.
I did send you all a project list. Granted, it's been a couple months. I sent you this project list, and on that project list, it had, 100 items. I don't know if Ron forwarded it to you when he gave you the list of from staff. I think he may have referred to it.
That was a separate list.
And on that list was the distressed property ordinance, which was a legislative change in 2013, I believe, that we needed to catch up our code to. And although I had actually done a draft of that ordinance back in 2013, it got bumped by other things. So when the issue for graffiti came up, I thought I could just fold that in. As it turned out, because I didn't want to mix the subjects of distressed property registration with nuisance, I made 2 separate ordinances. But frankly, they started out as one. I just divided it because I didn't want to combine the issues just logically. And because nuisance was easy, in the sense all I had to do was go to the nuisance code and add graffiti, and it was really already there, so as a catch-all. But we made it explicit. The other ordinance council rules amendment that was on tonight was something the council actually brought up at the end of the meeting and said, hey, can you look into this? And that was a couple months back, but I do send you that priority, I send you the list. And I did get extensive comments from one of you, I won't say who it was, about what I should do with each one and which one should be prioritized and contracted out, and I had all kinds of suggestions, but only one of you actually responded. And I'm not looking for individual comments, but the whole point of that list is if there is something that is more important to you, you should bring it up. Now, I do discuss that list with Ron. So, for example, we talked about the cultural center lease and said, well, their lease hasn't expired, unlike the Glass Studio, which was expiring. So we decided to prioritize the Taft property, school district property acquisition, since they've now acquired some property for buses. So we've decided to prioritize that over the cultural center. So we do have, and you guys kind of forced us to have this meeting where we talk about it. And it's been helpful in the sense that we've been able to take what's on my list and talk about it and say, well, where did this come from? Well, this was 3 years ago when someone said it would be a good idea if we did transfer development rights for the villages. And it's still on the list. Some of you may have been excited about it, some not. Things like sewering the lake and septic inspections were things that are generated by the former city manager and was gung-ho about it, but it's still on the list, but it doesn't seem to have a high priority right now for anybody. So I guess we can have a work session where we go through that list here in public, and you guys can, I don't really want to do it in executive session. I think we could sit here in a work session and say, what are your top 10? It's some things I try to do because the state law requires us to do. And I don't like having a code that's outdated or in violation of some Supreme Court opinion. Other things we do just because they're quick and easy.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I think on the list that Councilor Anderson's referring to, I did not put dates on most of that information, so I could easily get with our staff and update it and try to give you timeframes as well. Maybe that would be of help. And if I'm missing something on that list, please let me know.
So what I'm hearing is maybe stay with lists, because they keep them in front to make sure, to Ron's point, that we've captured them, so at least we know they're there. And I guess I'm remembering, I don't remember really the last time I got that list from the legal, but it's kind of hard to imagine 100 items all having the same priority. So some kind of, your priorities would be helpful, and then all the others, because that way we could, as council, could just deal with the exception, saying something below the line has a more urgency or something to provide you with feedback on a quarterly basis.
I just had this discussion with my assistant that we needed to revisit the list, and somehow she was like, well, let's put in a column where we've got the date. And it's like, it's not just the date, it's how important it is. And so I can create like the mayor's suggesting, the tier 1, the tier 2, in terms of priorities. And if you guys disagree, you can tell me to move it.
And what I'd say is, would be helpful for me is just down the next column would be, it could be simply color-coded. We're waiting for information, we're in process, just to say, if you got to wait for something from the state, well, we know we can wait a while for that. But if it's, I'm waiting for the courier to show up, a whole different matter. Okay.
I think that'd be helpful.
I agree. I totally agree. I always marvel at, and not to applaud too loudly for Councilor Anderson here, but I marvel at his ability to remember these things. I just can't keep track of it all, and so I thank you for that. And it's always helpful to get a reminder. So thanks. Okay.
I just had one comment. On November 2nd, earlier this month, I attended the Celebrate LBL along with Mr. Chandler and Mr. Dreistadt.
Sorry, LBL.
The Celebrate LBL was a celebration of Lynn Benton Lincoln put on by the Council of Governments. It was a fundraiser for Meals on Wheels, and a very detailed overview of the three counties and the present state of the counties. It was a well-done presentation, I felt. The Tour to Die For was one of the projects that was nominated for Project of the Region, and sadly, we did not receive the award, but a very worthwhile project did. The expansion of the boat dock at Toledo, which they felt really added to the economy of the region. So it was an enjoyable evening, and Lincoln City was represented. And the dinner next year will be in Lincoln County somewhere. I'm not sure where, but they will be coming to Lincoln County.
Yes or no?
Yeah, I guess so.
Jumping in here.
I just wanted to acknowledge all of the folks in the audience that are here and all their hard work and dedication to the homeless, and it's so appreciated. I did want to bring, the warming shelter. Thank you. There's one thing that I wanted to bring up, which was that in the local newspaper, the Guard, there was an article a little while back that they had received a location for this year. You okay?
I need something.
Okay. And that location is the old Taft fire station. And then I also saw some Facebook posts about that. And so I just wanted kind of an opportunity to clear the air or shed some light on it or whatever, because the funding source potentially is a grant from the city to the non-agencies or nonprofits, and so I just wanted to bring that up. And considering you own that building, I don't know if you want to, if that's a potential conflict of interest, no conflict of interest, or whatever. I just think because the money is a city money, and we as a council are not to benefit from our seats on the council. So just wanted to bring that up, and didn't want those folks out in the audience that are working so hard to be compromised, or because they do excellent work, and we're so grateful for their work and the funding that went to them through the grant process was well deserved by them, and we wish them the best. And I would just like to sort of clear up this one potential situation, which is city money to a nonprofit and coming to you. So just wanted to give you the opportunity, if you would.
I don't care to address it. I don't have a conflict of interest in this. I'd say along the lines of Councilor Walkie and her issue with the downtown manager, the money was appropriated beforehand. I had no interest in it, and it just came along at timing. So I would say we need to spend a little less time on Facebook, and considering what loonies say on Facebook versus talk to the people. They'll tell you.
I'd like to make just one comment. I am not accusing you of anything. I just want to say that the grant that was given to Bama was before I was on council. Okay, it wasn't before I was hired. It was before I was on council. I did not
I
make
stand
that
corrected.
decision.
I stand corrected. Thank you. Okay, I have just one thing, it's a dumb question from Mr. Apicello, but it came to my mind. When you're talking about the communication with the council, with like the coded stuff and all that, everyone here has all their faculties, you know, we can see here and all that. Will that be ADA compliant? Because I know that I can listen to the packet here. I can click on that, and it will read it to me. Is yours that way? Yeah, let's say we have a counselor who gets elected and is blind. Will that be something that can be taken care of?
I'm sure that we have that capability.
It just came to my mind.
I've never had to use it, but I'm sure we have it.
Yeah, well, I've had some counselors, or actually on planning commission, someone who said how great it was to be able to listen to the packet while they're doing things because their eyes get tired. And just one of those things just came to my mind.
Actually, I've had requests for large print, but never for hearing impaired, but vision impaired
Just a
maybe.
thought. I know in the age of legal sensitivities, and Kathy, you had something to add?
Yes, the city recorders have contacts for hearing impaired. We have equipment for hearing impaired, and we also have contacts for blind.
Right, but I'm asking for these little confidential packets for counselors specifically. Would they have that? You don't have to answer now. It's just a throw-out question. And then one last thing is Celebrate Recovery, which I've talked about once a month here, is actually on a hiatus. Faith Baptist will not be running Celebrate Recovery tomorrow or until sometime April or May. So they regret to say that. They're going to reorganize and hopefully come back stronger and better. With that, may God bless you all. May God bless what? Oh, well, say something then. Come on, guys. Go ahead.
Don, I'm going to, Mayor Williams, regarding the elephant in the room, and which is the question of the handling of the funds from the city that subsequently went into your control. To me, it's not a question. I think that was at least a potential conflict of interest, and it should have been addressed at both the council and for your little committee that you had to your recommendation committee. And I think at some point, and sooner than later, we're going to have to address that. And it should be addressed, and people should be confident that their money is being spent well. And we should be trustworthy. And something like this has the potential to splash mud on all of us. And I'm not out for anyone's hide, but I'm out for transparency. And so you folks know what you can have confidence what's going on here. And I'll end it with that.
May God bless you all. May God bless Lincoln City. We are adjourned.
Mics are off.